US President Joe Biden takes a swipe at China and warns there's still tough times ahead for the American economy. The Labor government rejects a huge Clive Palmer coal project near the Barrier Reef, and there's a major problem in space. Too much junk. It's Thursday, the 9th of February, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Shayne Elliott.
Good morning, Michael. Special item at the end of the show, all about space junk. Very much up your alley.
Any space story, and I am there for that, Shayne. You've got an interesting chat coming up as well after the show. Kath Whitaker, CEO of ASX-listed trading platform Self-Wealth.
Yes, we delve into what mum and dad investors have been buying in the first month of the year. And I've got to say, it surprised me because it's not the really big stocks. It's a particular sector which mum and dad investors are ploughing into, or at least they were in January. Fascinating chat.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's coming up a little bit later on. But the main story this morning, Shayne, President Joe Biden, in his State of the Union address yesterday, emphasised economic gains and his past legislative accomplishments in a speech that was really heavily focused on domestic issues.
Very much. The State of the Union is always a massive event and an opportunity for the president to outline his next 12 months of priorities. Now, Biden highlighted his policies, including efforts to lower drug prices and invest in infrastructure and domestic chip manufacturing, though he was pretty cautious on the economic outlook. He basically said it was too early to say that there had been an economic recovery. He wants to increase taxes on corporates and the wealthy, calling for a billionaire's minimum tax. He also said 55 of the largest corporations in the country made $540 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes. Incredible.
That's an amazing statistic.
It is. President Biden called climate change an existential threat, but he conceded the US will need to continue to rely on fossil fuels, things like oil and gas, for a while yet.
Now, I know there was a real kind of domestic focus, but what about international relations and where the US is heading? And I'm particularly thinking here about China.
Well, he addressed the rising tensions with China, saying while the US seeks competition, not conflict, he makes no apologies for investing to make America stronger. I think his most ominous line, Michael, was something along the lines of, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country. That certainly got some of the pundits excited. He said Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was a test that the US and its NATO allies had passed, and he'd stand with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as long as needed. He also said America is the only country in the world built on an idea. Now, maybe we kind of have to give him a little room. It is the State of the Union. But my favourite quote, sort of, was, other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity. We're the only nation based on the idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God.
Oh, I love the State of the Union address, Shayne. And I feel like kind of people appreciate, in Australia, I think people appreciate kind of what it is largely because of shows like West Wing and others, because it was such a big deal there. But really, it is such great theatre.
It is really good theatre, and no exception yesterday. So members of the party in power, so the Democrats this time around, they are continually standing to give an ovation to the president. The opposition, the Republicans, they tend to just sort of sit around, look bored. I mean, occasionally they clap, but mostly not. He was actually booed. The president was actually booed and heckled by some Republicans when he mentioned that some of that party had proposed cuts to Social Security and Medicare. He then kind of backtracked a little bit from that comment. Always interesting to see the invited guests that turn up to the Capitol. U2 lead man Bono was there. So too the Ukrainian ambassador to the US and the parents of Tyree Nichols. Nichols, of course, is a 29-year-old black man beaten to death by police in Memphis recently. Also, there was Nancy Pelosi's husband. She, of course, was the former Speaker of the House, and her husband was beaten up by an intruder last year. He was there and got a standing ovation, and well-deserved.
Yeah, it's a really significant event, isn't it? Particularly when it starts talking about China and kind of getting into some of that really big rhetoric that can have an impact on global politics.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And everything he says matters. And so the fact that he didn't quite threaten China, but he said the US will stand up for itself, that sends a real message to Beijing about the fact that the US does not want to be a pushover.
Say it draws a line in the sand, Sean.
Yes.
I just wanted to use that. It's such a great little cliche, that one, isn't it? I just thought, I really wanted to use it.
It draws a line in the sand which will continually move.
Yes, a moving line in the sand. All right. It's one of those sand dunes that kind of moves over time. All right. What's going on in local markets?
Oh, look, yesterday was a pretty decent day on the local market, with the S&P ASX 200 finishing up 0.4% to 7,530 points. That was off the back of a strong night on Wall Street. The banks all did well on the back of Suncorp's result. More of that in a moment. The iron ore and energy companies were higher. The retailers were mixed. Turning to the bond market. Oh, Michael, I can hear your heart racing.
No, what you heard was my eyes glazing over, but they do sound quite similar. Please go on.
Yes. Yields kept climbing yesterday, and they're now more than 20 basis points higher in the past few sessions. Now, Michael, listen up here.
Mm-hmm.
Higher yields reflect expectations of higher interest rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they also provide a more attractive option for investors looking for a safe investment. So you can go out and get 3.4% on a 3-year government bond yield. That is a lot better than a term deposit. So it's actually good news. There's always a silver lining in bond markets, one way or another. Now, having said that, we aren't an investment podcast. Go and get advice for your circumstances. But at least bonds are just looking more attractive to investors at the moment.
And Sean, on international markets, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has stuck to his mantra that interest rates need to keep rising to quash inflation.
Yes, speaking in Washington, Chairman Powell suggested that borrowing costs may reach a higher peak than traders and policymakers anticipate. The comments from the world's most powerful central banker were certainly heard by markets. Bonds were sold off. When bonds are sold off, yields rise, Michael. So there's a consistency in that story, just in case you weren't following earlier on.
I feel like I'm about to get a test on bonds here, Sean. So I'm taking notes now.
Not publicly. I wouldn't do that to you.
Thank you.
So bonds were sold off, but US equities surged. And that's because Powell also said the disinflationary process had begun, and it's begun in the goods sector, which the equity investors took as good news. But Powell also added there was a long way to go. Now, the comments suggest the 5.1% interest rate peak forecast by officials in December last year might prove just a little optimistic. Just quickly, away from equities, oil prices have risen a bit over the past 24 hours. Basically, Saudi Arabia, which is the world's biggest producer of oil, started upping its prices on shipments of oil to Asia, and that sent the global price up. And the Aussie dollar, Michael, is heading towards 70 US cents.
Disinflationary process, Sean. Is deflation a different thing altogether?
Very, very good question. There's a big difference between disinflationary and deflation. Deflation means prices are going backwards. Disinflation means the rate of inflation is slowing.
Oh, okay.
Good pickup.
Oh, well, I heard that term. I'm like, that sounds like a term that overcomplicates things, but it's actually a really important distinction.
Yes, very important distinction.
All right, there we go. I am listening, Sean. I'm proving to you that I am listening here.
I'm impressed.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the Albanese government has agreed to a demand by opposition leader Peter Dutton and will have the Australian Electoral Commission mail a pamphlet to voters seeking to explain the voice to Parliament.
Yes, and according to Phil Coorey of the Financial Review, a good man Phil, always believe what he writes, according to Phil, the government is holding the line against another demand by Mr Dutton that there will be public funding for the yes-no campaigns. Now, the education pamphlet and the public funding are non-negotiable demands the coalition issued on Tuesday in return for supporting legislation that would enable the referendum to be held later in the year. Mr Albanese has previously rejected a mail-out on the basis it's costly and obsolete in the digital age, but the coalition argues that 40% of voters still read material mailed to them during election campaigns, which might explain, Michael, why my local member still mails me information. I find it very irritating when an MP mails information because I think, what a waste of my money.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. There's very little exciting stuff comes in the mail anymore. I was lamenting this fact just yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, the government remains opposed to public funding for the yes and no campaigns because it doesn't want public money used to promote messages it fears could fuel prejudice.
And just staying in Canberra, Sean, Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek has banned Clive Palmer's Central Queensland coal project because it would cause irreversible damage to coastal habitats and send sediment into the Great Barrier Reef.
Yes, this came out last night. The decision is the first ever ministerial refusal of a coal mine under Australia's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Now, the mine itself is located less than 10 kilometres from the reef. It's about 130 kilometres northwest of Rockhampton. It's scheduled to produce up to 10 million tonnes of coal per year for export. Plibersek said the risks to the Great Barrier Reef, freshwater creeks and groundwater are just too great to allow it to go ahead. Now, it follows almost 6 months of consultation with the Department of Environment. There are about 9,000 public comments on the proposed decision. 98% supported the rejection of the application.
Wow, that's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, sure is.
Now, just quickly, Sean, up to 4 million Australians are estimated to have been infected with COVID-19 since late last year.
Health Minister Mark Butler made the comment as the government announced that all adults, no matter how many doses they've received already, are eligible for a vaccine top-up from February 20. I will be in line.
Yeah, same here. Now, on to the other big story of the week, Sean. ANZ boss Shayne Elliott has warned that home loan rates are entering dangerous territory for customers who borrowed to their limit when rates were low.
Yes, he said the 25 basis point increase this week meant customers will be paying more than the buffer built in when banks calculated the ability of borrowers to meet loan repayments. Now, it's something the Commonwealth Bank Head of Australian Economics, Gareth Aird, talked about in our interview yesterday morning. Well worth going back and listening to the Commonwealth Bank's take on this. The ANZ boss said the lowest home loan rate the lender gave was 1.94%, which is incredibly low for a mortgage rate. When they were doing the deal, they assumed that rates could go up to 5.25%. That's a pretty big buffer, 3.5% or 3.31%, and therefore made the decision to lend on that criteria. Obviously, the standard variable rate is now much higher than that. I mean, it's 6 or 7% in some cases. Elliott said up till now, people have pretty much handled the situation pretty well, but it's now going to bite. It's going to eat into people's savings, and it's something that we have to be very, very wary of.
It's really going to cause a lot of people some serious stress.
Yeah, it was just really interesting that the boss of one of the major banks yesterday gave those numbers, like 1.94%, great low rate, but let's say it's 2.5% for most of them. And they're assuming that rates could have gone to, 5.25 at the bottom, let's say 6%. It's actually at that already and continuing to rise. So those numbers really brought it home for me.
Yeah, it's pretty worrying. Now, Suncorp has outlined stronger lending in its banking business and a jump in house and car insurance premiums, underpinning a rise in profit and revenue.
Yes, another one of those stories. Good for shareholders, maybe not for the rest of us. It was certainly a strong result for the Queensland-based business. It included a 63% rise in cash profit, and its share price jumped 4.5% yesterday to $13.04. Suncorp also upped its dividend, which obviously will satisfy many shareholders. Now, the result came despite higher inflation and interest rates and the impact of 8 natural hazard events. They were mostly due to La Nina. Boss Steve Johnston said the company was on track to sell its banking arm to ANZ for about $4 billion. The insurance business, which owns brands like AAMI and Apia, more than doubled earnings, partly because house insurance premiums are up on average 11%, and average car insurance premiums are nearly 9% higher. No wonder they're making money.
Indeed. Now, serious story, Sean. BHP has suspended its iron ore operations after one of its trains hit and killed a worker on the outskirts of Port Hedland in WA.
Yes, health and safety is taken very, very seriously in mining, as it should be, and the big Australian now faces multiple investigations over the tragedy. The worker was hit about 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday night. It's the first death in the state's mining industry since last October, when 2 workers died in a 72-hour period in separate incidents. Neither of those 2 involved BHP. It comes more than 4 years after a major safety investigation by BHP following a runaway train that eventually derailed. It had no driver. Things have changed since then, but obviously a tragedy.
Yes, indeed. Now, Sean, you can't say that Andrew Forrest, boss of Fortescue, isn't a big picture thinker. Yesterday, the group said it had signed a convention for the Belinga iron ore project with the government of Gabon.
He's an ideas man, Michael.
He is an ideas man. That's
yes.
Well, speaking of great cliches, that is a ripper.
It is. Thank you to the castle. So the first mining in Gabon, which is in Central Africa, is planned for the second half of this year, which isn't far away. And Fortescue said it would invest about 290 million Australian dollars, 200 US dollars in the country. Forrest said geological mapping and sampling programs had confirmed the view that the region eventually could be one of the largest iron ore hubs in the world. Fortescue share price closed up 2% yesterday to $22.48.
Sean, building materials group Boral, which is 73% owned by WA billionaire Kerry Stokes, delivered a solid half-year result, sending its share price up 13% to $3.97.
Yeah, cement has never been more exciting. Now, firstly,
hang on. Did you just say cement has never been more exciting?
That's exactly what I said.
Okay.
This company, I never know whether to call it Boral or Boral.
I'm with you there. I was going to just leave you entirely just posted on that one there, Sean. But I'm with you. Boral. It's a little bit of a mystery.
You went Boral, so I'm going to go Boral because otherwise it'll be inconsistent. Though this conversation has just shown us up anyway. Boral owns 215 concrete plants, 32 quarries, and about 3,000 vehicles that supply concrete, gravel, and asphalt. Nothing boring about that. It has had an incredible few years. It's had a takeover battle, which Mr. Stokes won. It's had 3 CEOs in as many years. It's had to offload its US fly ash business, which was a total failure. And of course, it's leveraged to the building sector, which post-COVID in Australia hasn't had a great time. But its share price is up 36% this year alone. Investors just like the turnaround plan of the latest CEO, Vic Bansal. And they like the fact that Bansal says the 9 interest rate hikes over the past 9 months haven't yet crimped demand. And that's allowed Boral to up its prices, hence the share price surge yesterday. See, cement is interesting.
I stand corrected. Cement is thrilling. Well done.
This next story is going to challenge you, though.
What's it? Consumer packaging company. This consumer packaging does have its moments. Is this one of them? Let's find out. Amcor, Sean, reported half-year results.
Yeah, so net sales were high, but profit margins were squeezed. Basically, there's a big rise in material costs, things like resin and aluminium. Amcor uses plenty of those. They could partially offset it by a jump in prices, but those profit margins were squeezed. The good news is the price of these input costs are flattening out. Anyway, Amcor's share price fell 3.3% yesterday to $16.70.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as exciting as cement, was it?
No.
We should have started with consumer packaging and finished with cement.
Yeah, perhaps.
All right, next time. All right, international news, Sean. And trade between the US and China set a record last year. Official figures released Tuesday show, despite bilateral tensions running high and all the hullabaloo around the balloon flight. Do you like that one, Sean?
I love the fact that you said hullabaloo.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't you?
It's like there's a bunch of it. Brouhaha would be another one. Hullabaloo.
Well, it's really when you're talking about a balloon, the only word you can use is hullabaloo, right?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's a ripper.
Anyway, imports and exports of goods between the two countries hit $691 billion US. That's according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the US. The US, Michael, imported more toys and consumer products. China basically imported more foods, particularly soybeans. What I just think is interesting is this incredible trade between the two superpowers. So as we have these geopolitical tensions and as they escalate, both sides are still pretty pragmatic. They still understand that there's a commercial arrangement between each other, and that's growing.
Yeah, and despite the hullabaloo, they still need to get on to some extent.
That's right.
All right. Now, finally, Sean, the story that we've all been waiting for, and by we all, I mean me, there is a problem in space. Record numbers of satellites launched by China and Russia and the US are crowding Earth's orbit.
Yes, there's a lot of garbage up there. Satellites or old satellites, rocket fuselages, things like that. And basically, they've got the potential to destroy hundreds of millions of dollars or maybe billions of dollars worth of technology. Now, that would disrupt phone systems, car navigation, internet connection. Wouldn't that? Imagine the disaster if the kids couldn't game.
I love how you've really zeroed in on how this is going to affect.
Well, then that really would affect me because they'd want to talk to me. Well, TV broadcasting would go too, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, probably.
It'd be a disaster. And like, your financial transactions, your banking.
Yeah, see, and suddenly you just brought it back to a business podcast.
Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
Well played.
Look, over the past decade or so, the number of satellites launched have increased 17 times. And basically, there's about 90 countries who have now something in orbit. In fact, the US Department of Defense now tracks around 27,000 pieces of junk. Now, you throw in Elon Musk's plans to get about 12,000 satellites up there in the next few years. I think he's already got 5,000 satellites up there, but 12,000 satellites in the next few years. The problem is going to get even bigger. There's a Japanese private sector group, Sky Perfect, which, according to Nikkei Asia, is pioneering some pretty sci-fi solutions to clean space up. In fact, Michael, and this would have to appeal to you, it's testing the use of satellite-mounted lasers, basically to destroy or to change the orbit of space junk so that the space junk doesn't destroy the technology.
That sounds to me like James Bond, and I hate to relate everything back to James Bond, but it sounds like Moonraker.
It does sound like Moonraker.
Fantastic film, but also should be a little bit of a warning about putting lasers into space.
Yes. Yes. Anyway, the US and Japanese governments are certainly tracking this junk issue. I would say a big problem with the future, Michael.
Yes, I suspect so. And Sean, it really just kind of wraps up what's been a pretty wild ride today, hasn't it?
It's been a very enjoyable show this morning, I've got to say.
We've certainly covered some terrain. Up next is the Fear and Greed daily interview with Kath Whitaker, CEO of ASX-listed trading platform Self-Wealth. This is a good one.
Yes, the terrain we cover here is what mums and dads investors put their money into or sold out of during January. And it's not the big stocks. It's not the big banks, or it's one of the big banks make the top 10. And it's not necessarily the household name. So interesting chat.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And it's actually worth as well having a listen to How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast that I do with Canna Campbell. And because really this week it is about how to get started investing in shares. So it's a good one to kind of perhaps give to the kids to listen to, just anyone who actually just needs a bit of an understanding on some of the basics of it.
Or the adults.
Yeah, as well. I was going to kind of tiptoe around that one. Anyway, you can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll put a link in the show notes as well. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. I've really enjoyed this morning.
Same here. It's Thursday, the 9th of February, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.